And, you know, working in a bike store, your viewers will know, it's insecure work, it's controlled. You do what your boss tells you. You don't even get vacations unless the boss, you know, is nice to you. And Josh and his colleagues in the store, they didn't hate their boss. He wasn't a particularly bad boss as far as bosses go. They quite liked him as a person. But one day they just asked, what does our boss actually do, right? We fix all the bikes, and he seems to make all the money. What's going on here? They decided to do an experiment. They set up a different...
Round one, fight.
Damn.
Round two, fight. Mortals fascinate me. Final round, fight. Jackie Briggs wins. Round one, fight. Out of time.
bike store, a rival bike store. It's called Baltimore Bicycle Works, and it works on a different principle. So most people listening to this will work in corporations, right? Top down, you do what the boss says. It's modeled like an army. That is a very recent human invention, right? It only comes along in the late 19th century. What they did was try a different model. They're called democratic cooperatives. So at Baltimore Bicycle Works, they take all the big decisions together about their work. They vote. They share out the good tasks and the shitty tasks, so no one just gets stuck with all the shitty tasks. They share the profits, obviously. So they control their environment together. They're like a little tribe that control their environment instead of an army with one guy at the top controlling it. And one of the things that was so fascinating spending time with them, which is totally in finding with Professor Michael Marmot's research about what causes depression at work, is how many of them talked about having been really depressed and anxious when they were working in this controlled way. And their depression and anxiety had largely gone. It still had bad days, of course, but that kind of nagging depression and anxiety had gone away in this different environment. And as Josh said to me, there's no reason why any business should work in this top-down, controlled way that makes people depressed. It's not even more efficient. A study at Cornell University found that democratic businesses grow 4 times faster than top-down businesses. And I think what this opens up is a different way of thinking about depression. So what we've done up to now is we've said to depressed and anxious people, the job of fixing this is basically on you, buddy, right? Maybe if you're lucky, your family, maybe if you're lucky, your doctor. But actually, once you begin to realize that the reasons why people are depressed and anxious make sense, this is just one of many reasons why people are depressed and anxious, and also one of the things that's fueling the addiction crisis, which you can talk about if you want. Once you realise it makes sense, you suddenly realise what you've got to do is deal with the problem in the world as well as the problem just in the individual skull. Do you see what I mean?
Fight.
Well, it's just so strange that these sort of courses and these sort of ideologies are thriving in universities. And it's really disconcerting for someone who has children. And you know that your children are going to go there and they're going to be
Send them
exposed
to trade
to these
schools.
ideas.
You know, I think that I think
A
that
guy
the
who used to teach
universities.
at Harvard just says send them to trade school.
I think the universities. I think you can make a reasonable case that the universities do more harm than good. I hate to say that.
Well, this is a strange time where access to information is so incredibly easy. You could educate yourself
Right.
seemingly endlessly online, and with books, and just there's so much information available. This is not the 1930s. It's
Yeah.
not a time where it was difficult to get an education outside of a
Yeah. Well, the
university.
universities may have the university, which is like the repository of human wisdom and the attempt to expand it, may have already moved outside the universities. You know, just because an institution calls itself a university doesn't mean it is. And many disciplines have turned into ideological factories. And so where's the university? I mean, the university is where anyone wants to learn about their culture and where anyone wants to expand the domain of human competence. And a lot of that's happening online now. So maybe that's the future. The only thing the universities have now, I think, that people can't get elsewhere is accreditation. But they're doing everything they can as fast as possible to make their accreditation valueless anyways. So, yeah, it's a terrible thing to say that the universities may do more harm than good, and I haven't come to that conclusion lightly.
Well, there's
and I
also
hate to say it.
I'm sure you do. There's also a gigantic financial stake. The amount of money that you're
Well, this is especially the case in the U.S. I mean, one of the things that's happened over the last 30 years is that the proportion of university expenditures that's gone to the administration has massively increased. And at the same time, the student loan burden has increased. And so what's happened in a weird sense is that the administrators have conspired to steal the future earnings of their students. And then you can't declare bankruptcy. So to me, it's indentured servitude.
But you can't declare bankruptcy on student loans.
Right,
That's
you
a
can't
very
declare.
important
That's
distinction.
right. You cannot declare bankruptcy on student loans. So you think about that. You tell me what difference there is between that and indentured servitude.
There's not much because it's the only thing that I can even think of where that's the case.
Corporations can go bankrupt.
Right,
They
and
do it all the time.
individuals can. Individuals
Right.
can. Businesses can fail. You can be deemed incompetent or not capable of paying your debt in every other case, but not with universities.
Yeah, right.
Fight.
That is
Right.
crazy.
It is crazy.
It's crazy because they were just trying to combat the issue where so many kids were defaulting on their student loans. They're trying to make you perpetually responsible for it, or the idea is that these kids have to learn responsibility. Is that the way to do it? Like overcharging them for some useless
Well, I would
education?
also say that it's not particularly useful to burden your citizenry with a massive debt as soon as they graduate at a time when they're most likely to take entrepreneurial risks.
Yes.
You're not going to take entrepreneurial risks if you're so burdened with debt and you can't get yourself off the ground.
Yeah, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. People that are, if you're lucky, you're going to make what, $40,000, $50,000 a year straight out of college, if you're lucky. So you're dealing with the amount of money that you would have to make if you didn't pay any taxes or didn't have any expenses. You'd have to work for 4 or 5 years, longer than you would actually be in college to get that degree in the first
Yeah,
place. It's
yeah,
insane.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
insane. What you've done in your YouTube videos, which I think is an amazing forum, particularly for what you're doing, is document and describe in great detail the issues with every single one of these problems with no interruption. And I think that's one of the best things about it. The fact that there's not really a whole lot of forums that will give you the chance to express yourself. I've seen some of your videos have hundreds of thousands of views. And there's not a whole lot of forums where you can do that and speak for, they're all like an hour long, right?
I know.
I mean, it's amazing.
It is amazing. YouTube is well. I started posting my lectures on YouTube, my classroom lectures in 2013, and in really bare bones form. They're just an iPad recording of me lecturing. I didn't edit in the slides or the images, partly because that's very time consuming. But then I watched it for about 2 years, and by September of this year, it had climbed to about 1 million views. And then I really started thinking about YouTube, because YouTube was cute cat videos, and Justin Bieber songs for a very long period of time. But it's not that anymore. And that's probably been about 2 years or maybe 2.5 years. But then I realized that YouTube is actually a revolution that's as overwhelming as the Gutenberg press revolution. Gutenberg invented the printing press, and because for the first time in human history, a lecture can have the same reach and the same longevity as a book. And it's a lot easier for people to listen. And the time lag to publication is basically zero, right? I mean, because you can do it live, I guess, as we are right now, or you can post it in a day or two after publishing it, and you have access to this insanely large audience. And the other thing that's really interesting about YouTube with regards to my, especially the more academic videos, is there's only one reason that people are watching. One. It's not the production quality. The audio is okay, and I'm a good speaker, but it's not the production quality. The reason they're watching it is because they want to know. And that's something that's really cool about YouTube. And YouTube also seems to be quite skeptical about advanced production values. The people who are popular are often people like you, who are basically sitting there talking, and everyone's listening. It's like, oh, well, people are actually talking about something, and this turns out to be interesting. It's like the rebirth of genuine journalism. So, yeah, YouTube's God only knows what YouTube is, but
Well, I think
it's
the
a
internet
social
in general,
revolution.
I believe you're right, and I think the internet in general is this really new thing in terms of the ability to express yourself. I mean, it's only existed for 20 plus years, and in terms of human history, that's a blink of an eye. And it's only really been used, as you've described, over the last couple of years in this form.
And so I'm not cynical about the future, but I do believe that we're in an unprecedented state of indeterminacy and flux. And God only knows what could happen. I'm not, having said that, I wouldn't say I'm optimistic about the possibility that the universities will reform themselves, because I think, well, even with the free speech debate that the University of Toronto hosted, they did 3 politically correct things during the debate, which I thought was really interesting, because if I would have staged the debate and been working on their side, let's say, I would have said, strategically speaking, no politically correct maneuvering during this debate, because all it's going to do is discredit us. But that isn't what happened. The university opened up by noting that the land on which we were having the debate was once property owned by the original Native Americans, which is something I find abhorrent, because on the one hand we took it, and now on the other hand we want to be friends. It's like, I don't think you get to have both sides of that moral play at the same time. But that's okay. That's how the university opened the debate. And then the next thing that happened was that they announced that there would be counselors waiting outside for anybody who was too traumatized by the contents of the discussion. And then they closed by announcing the Trans Day of Remembrance. You know, but the reason I'm pointing this out is because it just shows you the fact that those things happened. They weren't even strategic. That's just how things are at the university. And they didn't even notice that people were going to turn themselves inside out, noticing that, saying, well, God, this is so biased, I can hardly believe it, which is exactly what happened. That's how saturated the universities are with this kind of thinking. And I don't have any idea what can reverse that. Collective decisions on the part of citizens, A, to stop sending their children there, B, to stop donating money and leaving it in wills, and C, to pressure politicians. Like, in my wilder moments, I think, cut the funding to the universities by 25%. And let the faculty have a war about what's important. And maybe what would be left over was what the university should be. But I really think it's, with the exception of the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics ends and things, I think it's come to that.
Don't you think that what you're doing when you're making these videos is, in a sense, branching out away from just a university and teaching online? Because you are.
Well, like I said, I think that you could make a case that that's where the university is, because that's where people are going just to get knowledge. They have no other motivation.
And this is a new thing, obviously. But at one point in time, so was the printing press, right? And this new ability to disseminate information seems to me to be more effective, more accessible, more reasonable.
Yeah.
And it's entirely possible that what we're looking at is the future of education.
Maybe universities better be careful, because they're dumping their content online as fast as they can. They're going to make themselves completely superfluous. And some smart person, I've been thinking about this for 20 years, is going to take over the accreditation. Because, you know, all you'd have to do is set up a series of well-designed examinations online and only let a minority of people pass. You have instant accreditation credibility. It's like, here's an entire 3 years worth of psychology courses, here's the exams, you take them, only 15% of the people pass.
Why only 15%? Why would you limit the number?
Because it makes the accreditation valuable.
But you would limit the number based on, what if you had a much larger group than 15% that were effectively absorbing the information?
Well, fair enough. You'd have to toy with the accreditation mechanisms. But I mean, part of the utility in accreditation is that it's inequality. If everyone gets accredited, then the accreditation is worth nothing.
But wouldn't you just make it difficult?
Because that's what you do, is make it difficult.
Yeah, but
it's
I mean,
just
instead
a proxy
of limiting
for difficulty.
Right, okay. So you wouldn't necessarily be limiting the number, you would just make it so difficult that the number would be limited almost naturally.
That's right. Well, I think yes, that's exactly right. I wouldn't limit the number of times people could take the exams.
That's a great idea as well.
So as long as you hit threshold, I mean, that's what happens often, say with like if you're trying to pass the bar or something like that. You get to take it a number of times, but you have to. Well, we've tried other online interventions too. So I have these YouTube videos up, but we also designed. I worked with some corporations a while back because I've done some consulting, and I had designed
the Joe Rogan Experience
strategies so that they can figure out who is going to lead and who is going to follow.
Big name in the news in the Weekly Insider, and this week, it's Jordan Peterson, the Canadian.
And we're live, gentlemen. Dr. Neil Reardon. Am I saying that right?
Yes, sir.
And Mel Gibson. How are you, sir?
Hey, how you doing?
Welcome aboard, folks. First of all, to what degree? I mean, and you're not talking about just like psilocybin, or Amanita muscaria.
We're kind of intellectually provincial in that we are using language and invented terms in order to describe concepts that we're struggling with. So, let me describe it this way: that we separated from fungi 650 million.
What should someone do if they have a hard time sleeping? Like, say if you're a person who has insomnia, you have a hard time getting to bed, you have a hard time staying asleep. When you wake up, you can't go back to bed.
Yeah.
Are there strategies?
There are. I mean, I think for most people there are 5 things that you can do just out the gate
to get better sleep, regularity is probably the most important thing I can tell you. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, no matter whether it's the weekend, weekday, regularity is key. We've spoken about light. For example, when you, in the last hour before bed, try to stay away from screens, but also just switch off half the lights in the house. You would be surprised at how soporific that is. It really starts to sort of make you feel a bit more drowsy. They've done some great studies where they would take people out, you know, into the Rockies, no electric light, no electricity whatsoever, and they started to go to bed 2 hours earlier than their acclaimed natural bedtime. It wasn't just because they didn't have anything necessarily to do, it was that their melatonin was rising, you know, 2 hours earlier. So keep it dark. The third is probably keep it cool. Your brain actually needs to drop its temperature by about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate sleep. And that's the reason that you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot.
I've seen people use cold pads.
Yeah.
Have you seen those? They sleep on these cold pads. What do you think of those?
Yeah, I mean, the evidence is pretty good that cooling the body actually works. They've, you know, in the book I write about a series of studies where they had people in, it's almost like a wetsuit, but it has all of these veins running through it, and they could actually perfuse warm or cold water into any part of the body, hands, core of the body, feet, and so that you could exquisitely manipulate the temperature of any part of the body. And what they found is that they could effectively cool the body down, and it instantaneously made people fall asleep faster, and it gave them deeper, deep non-REM sleep, restorative sleep for the body. So, and you can even look at studies where people sleep semi-naked, and that also seems to improve their sleep, and they get a little bit more deep sleep too. So cold is better. The paradox here, though, is that you need to warm your feet and your hands to kind of charm the blood away from your core out to the surface and radiate that heat.
Really? So
yeah,
you should go to sleep with socks and gloves on?
Yeah, or better still, have a hot bath. Evidence here, too, that I discuss where people say, you know, I get out of a hot bath, I feel nice and toasty and relaxed, and that's why I fall asleep. It's the opposite. When you get into a bath, you get vasodilation. You sort of get rosy cheeks, red skin. All of the blood rushes to the surface. You get out of the bath, and you have this massive thermal dump of heat that just evacuates from the body. Your core body temperature plummets, and that's why you sleep better. So you can hack the system very easily.
Wow. So your core body temperature plummets, and that's what makes you sleep easier.
Yeah.
That sounds so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it makes sense.
And it makes sense because that's how we were designed. If you look at hunter-gatherer tribes whose way of life has not changed for thousands of years, and you ask how do they sleep, one of the things that seems to dictate their sleep is the rise and fall of temperature. You know, temperature is at its lowest in the nadir of the night, 3 or 4 in the morning. And as that temperature, that climate temperature starts to drop, that's when they start to get drowsy, as if temperature is just sort of signaling to the brain, now it's time to sleep. So light as well as temperature are 2 key triggers to help you get better sleep. If you look at those tribes, by the way, and when they go to sleep and they wake up, they go to sleep probably about 2 hours after dusk, sort of 8 to 9 in the evening, wake up about half an hour, even an hour before dawn. It's the rising temperature rather than light that triggers their awakening. But there's a reason, have you ever thought about what the term midnight actually means? Middle of the night.
Right.
And that's what it should be for all of us. But in modernity, we've been dislocated from our natural rhythms. And now midnight has become the time when we think, I should check Facebook last time, I should send my last email.
Yeah.
That is not how we were, designed to sleep. And in fact, we may also be designed to sleep biphasically too. If you look at those hunter-gatherers, they don't sleep one long bout of 8 hours at night.
Yeah, I've heard this recently, that you should have 2 sleeps. The idea of 2 sleeps.
Yeah, it's actually a little different than the idea of 2 sleeps. So there was a time in sort of the Dickensian era where people would sleep for the first half of the night, maybe sort of 4 hours or so. Then they would wake up, they would socialize, they would eat, they would make love, and then they would go back and have a second sleep. if you look at natural biological rhythms in the brain and the body, that doesn't really seem to be how we were designed. It certainly seems to be something that we did in society, but I think it's more of a societal trend than it was a biological edict. However, we do seem to have 2 sleep periods the way that we were designed. Those tribes will often sleep about 6.5 hours, 7 hours of sleep at night. And then, especially in the summer, they'll have that siesta-like behavior in the afternoon. And all of us have that. Sort of this, what's called the postprandial dip in alertness, just means after lunch. And if I measure your brainwave activity with electrodes, I can see a drop in your physiological alertness somewhere between 2 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon.
But is that dependent on diet?
It's not. People think it is, especially after they've had lunch.
Yeah.
You can actually just have people fast and sort of, fasting for long periods of time actually makes your sleep much worse. But you can have people abstain from lunch and you still get that drop. So it's independent of food. It's a genetically hardwired, pre-programmed drop that suggests we should be sleeping biphasically.
But is that dependent upon their standard diet? Because if someone is on a carbohydrate-rich diet, a lot of times you do get that spike, and then you crash. But when people are on low-carb and high-fat diets, they don't get that, and they tend to be more even with their energy through the day.
Yeah. So yeah, that sort of more constant release of energy can actually help you sort of almost combat that lull.
But that lull exists no matter what.
Exactly.
So even if you don't think it exists, it's there.
It's still present.
Interesting. Yeah. So why did they do that in the Dickens era? Why did they? What is there a root cause of their double sleep thing?
We don't know. I mean, it's hard to sort of really go back.
Fascinating.
It's
incredible. That was a trend.
Yeah, that it was a movement.
That they would just wake up and do things and.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because they didn't have TV. And they didn't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah. Well, sounds like they did some pretty interesting things which were nice, but yeah.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think I know that there's a stigma attached to mental illness, and that really bothers me. There should not be. I mean, having depression or anxiety or whatever, to me, should have no more stigma than having a knee injury or a kidney infection or diabetes. But there is a stigma attached to it. And I've tried to talk about this in a way where it's okay to talk about it and not be ashamed of it. It's okay. If you've got anxiety, you've got PTSD, whatever, it's okay. Let's talk about it. Let's get help for it, get it behind you, and move on. I mean, it's not something that you should be ashamed of.
What do you, when you're talking to someone that maybe has depression, do you try to get them to exercise first? Do you try to get them to visit a psychiatrist immediately and get on medication? Like, do you take it on a case-by-case basis?
Well, I do, but you have to approach it. Everybody has a philosophy about it, and I'm not saying that mine's any better than anybody else's, but I do have a philosophy about it, and I'm very slow to medication. I mean, I think you use medication for biochemical replacement. I mean, if for some reason your body is not making enough of something it needs, then maybe you support it short term biochemically. But I look at depression. There's a lot of ways you can break it up, but I look at it like, is it exogenous depression or endogenous depression? I mean, is it coming from the inside out or the outside in? Is it because you're reacting to something? I see a lot of depressed people that, in a sense, it makes sense.
Right.
I mean, you look at their life and you say, well, if you're not down about this, you should be. I mean, you've lost your job, you've gotten a divorce, your health is in the shitter, I mean, you should be down about this. It's external things. So you don't need a pill. I mean, put somebody in a chemical straitjacket because their life's falling apart. What the hell's that going to do?
Yeah.
But that's just putting goggles on them where they can't see it. I would much rather get them to behave their way to success and say, what are you reacting to that you're depressed about? Let's put that on a to-do list and start, like you said, write it down and start crossing those things off. Let's figure what's an action plan to change this, action plan to change the next thing. And then when you start doing that, then you generally see their mood lift. A lot of people that are depressed are just realistically reacting to a crummy circumstance in their life. It's not necessarily a mental illness. It's just a realistic reaction to a bad spot in their life.
Yeah, that's such a good way of putting it, too, that if you weren't in a bad state looking at this, there might be something wrong with you.
Yeah, you're in denial.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've gotten a divorce, lost your job, your health's in bad shape, your kids are alienated from you, and you're saying, I'm fine, then you're not in touch with reality. I mean, you should be bothered by that. And I think to give somebody a pill to mask your feelings about that just keeps you off task. Pain's a good motivator. I grew up in like Texas and Oklahoma, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but I used to spend my summers in the thriving metropolis.
You and I, we share African ancestry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was shocked.
Yeah, I'm 1.6%.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, I have more. I have more credential than you in that department.
You're 2%, right?
Yeah, I know. And it's funny because you sort of have the story in your family, kind of like where you came from, and everything made sense. And I always knew I was 25%, Italian, and I knew that my family came from Sicily. In fact, the Ranellas that came from Sicily all seem to become kind of.
John Oliver just released another video or segment that has been turned into a video on John Oliver just released another video or segment that has been turned into a video on nuclear waste. Now, here's the deal. I think John Oliver is very funny. I think the segment actually has a lot of funny bits. But John Oliver, I will say this, and we'll get to why he is entirely wrong on nuclear power. As a matter of fact, it's not going nearly as viral as others because most people know that he has no idea as to what he's talking about. But he's gotten so lazy. It's become a formula, and it's easy to pick out where we don't even necessarily have to rebut, a 20-minute segment because about 65% of it is anecdotal.